The relationship between Elizabeth I and Robert Dudley, with its enduring nature, captivates us because it defies expectations of a royal romance. It wasn't a classic love story with a neat ending, but a lifelong bond tinged with passion, scandal, and unanswered questions. Elizabeth, the Virgin Queen, famously never married, but a deep connection to Dudley, her childhood friend and closest courtier, sparked endless speculation. Were they lovers, or did duty keep them apart? The ambiguity is irresistible. Their dynamic was filled with a poignant mix of public tension and private longing, as seen in letters and how they relied on each other throughout their lives. Despite Elizabeth's refusal to wed him, Dudley remained her favourite. The political intrigue, court gossip, and the emotional intensity of their relationship blur the line between personal desire and royal duty, fueling stories for centuries. From T.S. Eliot's poetry to countless films, their stories symbolise as love thwarted by power, forever leaving us asking, what if? The relationship between Elizabeth I and Robert Dudley had its roots in their shared childhood. Robert once confided to the French ambassador that they had become friends before she was 8 years old, and that he knew her better than any other man on earth. They were of similar age, shared a love for riding and hunting, and even had the same tutor, Roger Ascham. Their families were also intertwined. Robert's mother, Jane Dudley, served as a lady-in-waiting to Elizabeth's mother, Anne Boleyn, marking the beginning of their acquaintance. During Elizabeth's brother Edward VI's reign, Robert was a court companion and part of the king's inner circle, though not much is recorded about their interactions during this time. The turning point came under Mary I's reign, a period of political upheaval that brought Elizabeth and Robert much closer. When Edward VI died in 1553, Robert's father, John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, orchestrated a failed coup to place Lady Jane Grey, Robert's sister-in-law, on the throne. But Mary I swiftly quashed the attempt, and John Dudley was executed for treason. Robert and his brothers were imprisoned in the Tower of London. His stay there coincided with Elizabeth's imprisonment in March 1554, under suspicion of involvement in Wyatt's rebellion. The Tower was a place of fear and uncertainty for both. While romanticised myths suggest clandestine meetings between Elizabeth and Robert during this time, the Tower's restrictions would have made this near impossible. Elizabeth was allowed to walk in the garden, but always under supervision. Nonetheless, the emotional weight of their shared trauma in this dark chapter of their lives forged an unbreakable bond between them. This period of imprisonment, however grim, laid the foundation for their lifelong relationship. The two, having endured political instability and the threat of execution, were bound by more than just personal affection. They shared a deep understanding of the precariousness of power, survival, and loyalty. Though their love story is often shrouded in myth and speculation, it's clear that these early years solidified their connection, one that would shape Elizabeth's reign and Robert's place in her court for decades to come. When Elizabeth I ascended to the throne on November 17, 1558, one of her first acts was to appoint Robert Dudley as the Master of the Horse, a role that put him in constant close contact with the Queen. It was a prestigious position, but one that also fueled rumours, as Elizabeth's apparent closeness to Dudley quickly became a subject of scandal. Count de Feria reported to Philip II of Spain that Lord Robert had gained so much favour with the Queen that she allegedly visited him day and night, and that people were speculating she would marry him once his wife, Amy Robsart, had passed away. At the time, Robert was still married to Amy, the daughter of a Norfolk squire, who had never appeared at court. Though Robert had visited her occasionally, including at Easter in 1559, his constant presence by the Queen's side stirred gossip. Elizabeth had even moved Robert's bedchamber to hers, further igniting whispers. The rumours weren't confined to England alone. They spread across Europe, painting a scandalous picture of the Queen and her court favourite. Matters escalated dramatically on September the 8th, 1560, when Amy Robsart was found dead at the foot of a staircase at Cumnor Place. Dudley, who was with Elizabeth at Windsor Castle then, was devastated and immediately ordered an inquest to uncover what had happened. The death was controversial and many suspected foul play, particularly because of the existing rumours about Robert and the Queen. Dudley himself feared the worst, acknowledging that the malicious talk would only worsen. Despite the official ruling of accidental death, the shadow of Amy's demise haunted Dudley and Elizabeth, casting a permanent cloud of suspicion over their relationship. The scandal, deeply rooted in court intrigue, would follow them for the rest of their lives. William Cecil, Elizabeth's chief advisor, was deeply concerned about the possibility of Robert Dudley becoming king consort. In response, he fueled rumours to undermine the match. Before news of Amy Dudley's death became public, Cecil had already confided to the Spanish ambassador that Robert and Elizabeth planned to marry and were plotting to poison Amy, spreading claims that she was ill despite her apparent good health. Nicholas Throckmorton, the English ambassador in France, similarly opposed the marriage and used the scandal to stir gossip at the French court. While both men exploited the situation for political ends, neither believed Robert had orchestrated his wife's death. Though suspicions swirled, historians generally consider murder unlikely. In 1956, medical professor Ian Aird suggested that Amy Dudley might have had breast cancer, whose effects could have led to a fatal fall down the stairs. This explanation, along with the possibility of suicide due to illness or depression, has gained traction. While Robert was now free to marry Elizabeth, the shadow of Amy's death cast a cloud of suspicion, and Elizabeth lightly understood that marrying him could jeopardise her throne, keeping her from making him her husband. Elizabeth and Robert Dudley's bond remained unshaken despite the scandal and court gossip. They delighted in each other's company, sharing a love for riding, hunting and wildly dancing. They often spent time together, sometimes at the expense of royal duties. Ambassador de Quadra reported that Elizabeth skipped an important meeting on April the 8th to watch Dudley play tennis, a sign of her preference for his companionship. But still their closeness sparked endless rumours. Elizabeth herself reportedly told the French ambassador, "I cannot do without my Lord Robert, for he is like my little dog." She similarly confided to another ambassador, "I love him and will love and regard him all my life long, for he deserves it." This intimacy led to constant speculation about marriage, which they both seemed to enjoy teasing people with. On June the 30th, 1561, de Quadra wrote to Philip II, describing an event hosted by Robert, in which the possibility of marriage was once again hinted at. Their relationship, always surrounded by mystery and court intrigue, kept Europe curious.
On the day of St. John, the Queen ordered me to be invited to a feast given by Lord Robert in the afternoon. We went on board a vessel from which we were to see the rejoicings, and she, Robert and I being alone. They began joking, which she likes to do much better than talking about business. They went so far with their jokes that Lord Robert told her that if she liked, I could be the minister to perform the act of marriage, and she, nothing loath to hear it, said she was not sure whether I knew enough English to carry out the service.
By the summer of 1562, rumours about Elizabeth and Robert Dudley's relationship reached a fever pitch, with many speculating they had secretly married. These whispers spread so rapidly that the Queen herself and her council had to address them. De Quadra, the Spanish ambassador, claimed multiple times that he was certain Elizabeth had married Dudley secretly, even telling the Spanish ambassador's secretary that he knew this to be true. De Quadra also wrote to Philip II, referencing a conversation with Lord Chamberlain Howard and Dr. Nicholas Wotton, in which he suggested the Queen had married Dudley at the Earl of Pembroke's house in Baynard's Castle, London. But despite these persistent rumours, no marriage ever materialised. Elizabeth admitted a deep attachment to Robert, telling the Duke of Saxony that she favoured him because Dudley remained steadfast during Mary I's reign when others abandoned her. He had even sold his possessions to support her financially, an act she felt obligated to repay with loyalty and affection. However, the unexpected struck in autumn of 1562 when Elizabeth fell gravely ill with smallpox. She was quickly reduced to a semi-conscious state, later recalling, "Death possessed every joint of me," a harrowing reminder of just how fragile her reign and Dudley's hopes truly were. As Elizabeth lay gravely ill with smallpox, her council gathered by her bedside. In a dramatic moment, she demanded that, should she die, Robert Dudley be appointed Lord Protector of the realm. Despite her deep affection for him, she insisted that nothing improper had ever occurred between them. She even arranged for John Tamworth, a groom of the chamber who stayed in Robert's quarters, to receive a £500 yearly income. Thankfully, Elizabeth recovered, much to the court's relief. Dudley, already involved in foreign affairs, was then appointed to the Privy Council. In 1563, Elizabeth proposed that Robert marry her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots, hoping to secure peace between England and Scotland. However, Elizabeth had no intention of losing sight of Robert, suggesting they all live together at the English court. Mary, sceptical of Elizabeth's seriousness, sought to gauge her chances of inheriting the English throne. Elizabeth had stated that she'd only recognise Mary as an heir if she married Robert, though rumours of Elizabeth and Dudley's relationship left Mary wary. She even confided to Bess of Ardwick that Robert had reportedly visited Elizabeth's bed. Despite the intrigue, by September 1564, Robert was elevated to the title of Earl of Leicester, keeping him close to both the Queen and the throne's political machinations. In January 1565, Mary, Queen of Scots, told English Ambassador Thomas Randolph that she would accept Robert Dudley's proposal. However, Dudley made it clear that he was not interested in marrying Mary, aligning himself with Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, Mary's preferred suitor. Elizabeth wavered on naming Mary as heir, but by March 1565 she had withdrawn the proposal, later telling the Spanish ambassador it failed because Dudley refused to cooperate. As Elizabeth's reign continued, the pressure for her to marry intensified, with suitors from across Europe vying for her hand. Despite this, Dudley still hoped Elizabeth would marry him. Their letters to each other were given affectionately, and Eyes was a playful nickname Elizabeth had given him. In a sign of her favour, Elizabeth gifted Dudley Kenilworth Castle, where he poured his ambitions and wealth into grand renovations. He transformed Kenilworth into a status symbol, adding a gatehouse, formal gardens and a residential wing, making it a prime example of Elizabethan architecture. Elizabeth visited Dudley at Kenilworth on at least 4 occasions. Her most famous stay was the lavish 19-day visit in July 1575. Filled with grand festivities, Dudley hoped he would finally persuade her to accept his proposal. The visit, a last-ditch effort to win her hand, was as much a plea for her approval as a signal that Dudley might eventually marry another. By this time, Elizabeth's reluctance to marry had become more pronounced, leaving Dudley's hopes unrealised, but their bond undiminished. In 1578, Robert Dudley began secretly courting Lettice Knowles, the daughter of Catherine Carey, who was the niece of Anne Boleyn, making her Elizabeth's cousin. Unbeknownst to the Queen, Robert and Lettice married secretly on September 21st, 1578. She was furious when Elizabeth eventually discovered that her beloved Robert had married her cousin. The betrayal stung deeply, and she banished Lettice from court for life in her rage. Though Elizabeth's anger extended to Dudley, she eventually forgave him, but their relationship had changed. Despite this betrayal, Elizabeth and Robert rekindled their closeness. In 1585, when Dudley was set to command her forces in the Netherlands, Elizabeth was distraught at his departure, so much so that he found her on the verge of nervous collapse. He stayed with her through sleepless nights as she struggled to let him go. Even after this, rumours about their relationship persisted. In 1587, an extraordinary claim surfaced. A young man arrested by Spanish officials claimed to be Arthur Dudley, the secret son of Elizabeth and Robert Dudley. He said he had been raised by Robert Southern, a former servant of Elizabeth's governess, Cat Ashley. On Southern's deathbed, Arthur learned his true parentage, but fled when no more details were given. While Arthur's claim reached Francis Englefield, an exiled Catholic aristocrat, it failed to convince him, and Englefield reported to King Philip II that Arthur's story amounts to nothing. After this, Arthur Dudley disappeared from history, leaving only more speculation. Robert Dudley stood by Elizabeth I's side as she delivered her famous speech at Tilbury on August 8, 1588, following the defeat of the Spanish Armada.
I know already, for your forwardness you have deserved rewards and crowns, and we do assure you on a word of a prince, they shall be duly paid. In the meantime, my lieutenant general shall be in my stead, than whom never prince commanded a more noble or worthy subject, not doubting but by your obedience to my general, by your concord in the camp, and your valour in the field, we shall shortly have a famous victory over these enemies of my God, of my kingdom, and of my people.
It seemed the danger had passed, but neither knew it would be their last month together. Dudley, feeling unwell, left court to focus on his health. On August the 29th, from Rycote, penned his final letter to Elizabeth. Though gravely ill, he travelled on to Cornbury, where he passed away on September the 4th, 1588. Elizabeth was devastated, locking herself in her chambers for days. William Cecil had to order the doors broken down to reach her. Elizabeth kept Robert's last letter close to her for the rest of her life. When she died at Richmond Palace in 1603, it was found in a keepsake box beside her, marked his last letter. Their relationship was far from a fairy tale. It was full of highs and lows, heartbreak and devotion, and sometimes bordered on obsession. They broke each other's hearts and those around them, but their bond endured. Best friends, lovers and confidants, their connection transcended any need for physical consummation. What mattered was that they were soulmates, deeply bound to each other, a bond that continued long after Robert's death. Their relationship's passion, madness and chaos, marked by love and loss, make their story so enduringly fascinating. It was brutal, yet timeless. If you enjoyed this latest video, give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. Click on the screen now to explore the untold stories and hidden secrets of another fascinating figure with a story to tell. Get ready to uncover more historical gems and intriguing royal tales. Your next adventure in history starts right here.